Time for a fresh outlook. Thanks for joining us. I'm Toschi. We welcome you to the show, but we apologize for all the bad news again. It has been months of turmoil overseas, and as we just saw outside St. Louis this week, it has also been a week of turmoil here in the United States. And then we heard of the suicide of the beloved Robin Williams. Now, it left many of us shaken. How could a man who spent decades making the world laugh take his own life? Here's more on the very talented Robin Williams.
Oscar-winning actor and comedian Robin Williams was found dead Monday from an apparent suicide at his home outside of San Francisco. He was 63. The coroner's office suspects the death was a suicide due to asphyxia, but the cause of his death is still under investigation. Williams won an Academy Award in 1997 for his role as a therapist in Good Will Hunting. His publicist said he had recently been suffering from severe depression. Williams had struggled with addiction in the past. He had entered a Minnesota rehabilitation center last month to help him maintain sobriety.
Certainly some sad news there. Now, we found it interesting to learn that Robin Williams was reportedly obsessed with video games. His favorite was said to be World of Warcraft. The game's lead designer from Blizzard Entertainment announced it would create a character in honor of the late comedian. Just one of the latest developments. Joining us now to talk more about the loss of this man who made us laugh for decades, we have my co-host and former White House aide Dee Dee Benkie, political psychologist Dr. Bart Rossi, and actor James Lewis. And we welcome you all. Nice to see you again, James. Certainly some sad news when we heard this, and such a shock to the world. I mean, Dr. Bart, you treat people all the time. I mean, how do you tell people to cope with this? I mean,
well, what I basically say is that if you have depression mixed with alcohol and drug use and long-standing personality problems that are not properly addressed, something like this can happen, and it's very unexpected when you have a person so dynamic like this. And I think he covered up a lot of the problems because he was so funny, and not just funny, but actually brilliant.
Oh, a lot of people call him a genius.
And I think his work in Good Morning Vietnam, when he projected a certain personality, was really over-the-top spectacular, really.
We talk about our favorite memories and our favorite movies of the late Robin Williams. What was your favorite, Dee Dee?
Well, Dr. Bart beat me to the punch. I can't believe you said that. No, I think Good Morning Vietnam is really incredible. You know, based on a true story, a true character.
Absolutely.
But I also love Night at the Museum when he plays Theodore Roosevelt, the president. So, you know, I mean, that's sort of a silly one, but it just shows the scope that he had. He could be very serious, but also just hilarious. So what a talent.
And James, you work with a lot of actors, and of course, a lot of comedians, they say, are underneath it all, the surface of all the laughter, there's actually a lot of pain.
But in fact, some people say as many as 80% of them, their comedy comes from a place of tragedy. And my personal theory is that a guy like Robin Williams and Jim Carrey's got the same quality. They go to such a deep emotional place to bring forth that comedy. They wind up exposing themselves personally to emotional danger.
And if we do also want to add that Robin Williams is one of 39,000 Americans who take their lives every year. Right. This has become a bit of a, some people say that it's increasing. And we hear all this horrible news, and then something like this of an individual shocks us.
Well, I think a lot of psychologists talk about the diagnosis borderline personality. And I think certainly Robin Williams probably had that type of diagnosis. I mean, I certainly didn't treat him, but I think that what it really means is that people in many ways have trouble dealing with all of the issues of life. There are many factors that they seem like they do okay, but basically they're struggling internally with almost every aspect of life. And he, of course, covered it over. But what happens is with depression like this, people get so they have these feelings of inadequacy, and they might be thinking about taking their life, and we don't know about it until it's too late.
And I always say, like, you never know what the other person is thinking about, whether it's a celebrity like Robin Williams or an individual. Always give them a smile and think that maybe there's some sort of struggle that they're dealing with. Yeah. But he's not the only celebrity, and you always think that celebrities have it all. We've seen Whitney Houston.
And also more pressure, though. I see, that's what I think. I think when you are a celebrity and you're looked up to, and you have this talent, and you win these awards, I mean, it's constantly, what am I going to do next? And if they're not doing something, maybe they feel a failure. So I think it's different in the entertainment world. It's just a different world instead of maybe, being a store clerk. You
don't quite see that, let's say, in in politics, politicians or sports figures. You do see it more. Sometimes it's attributed to drug use, as we saw with Philip Seymour Hoffman earlier this year.
Or maybe the type of personality drawn to that, which I thought was interesting what you said. I mean, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Someone who is sad and they're drawn to being a comedian for the escape. I mean, how does that happen?
What are your thoughts on that, James?
The owner of the Laugh Factory he is so aware of the emotional fragility of his comedians. He actually has on-premises psychologists available to them just to drop in.
I'm doing a comedy show tonight.
I was just going to say,
should I not get into this? I mean, because that's so fascinating.
Dee Dee actually, but continue, and then we're going to talk about some of the stuff that Dee Dee's doing.
Well, some actors, not just comedy, but a guy like, for example, the Spanish actor Javier Bardem. He once told me that he's had to go to such a deep emotional place. It was the movie Beautiful. He said he almost didn't come back. So actors have to go to those places, but they have to have the emotional stability to be able to come back and function.
I was going to say, that's a great question. Don't you think that in some ways going to that deep spot could be cathartic if you're dealing with something? Is that another theory?
It could be cathartic.
If you can handle it, okay.
Yeah, it depends on the personality type. I think you guys are really on the right track here, because you have Michael J. Fox, for example. He's suffering from serious physical problems, emotional issues, but he has transcended that by the way he thinks. And we often talk a lot on this show about if we can change the way people think and how they deal with problems, their behaviors will change.
And of course we want to mention, because you mentioned Michael J. Fox, that of course Robin Williams, his wife, disclosed earlier this week after his suicide that he was in the early stages of Parkinson's disease.
And that could have been what did. I mean, he said, I cannot live that way. Maybe he's just thinking.
I don't think that was the major factor. I think it was only a factor. Everything else over time and all those issues of depression and feelings of inadequacy for many years, I think, as James has said, a lot of these actors, it develops over time and it's overwhelming.
I agree, but I still think that of all the different types of actors and comedians, I would probably say that this was the greatest shock. I mean, Philip Hoffman Seymour, he had struggled quite a bit. We know with drug addiction, but Robin Williams, we know he had been sober for quite a long time. So this was, I think, a great shock. I mean, do you agree on that?
Well, he talked about it, and I thought that was cathartic, and certainly he shares with other addicts.
He jokes about it.
It's okay to come out and air the laundry, but.
I think it was shocking, to answer your question. I think it was really shocking because he's so brilliant and so over the top with his humor.
He's
so funny.
And
also beloved.
All the time.
For his humor, he was so beloved, so that he had everything going for him, and then this happened. So you're right.
But you know what I thought was kind of ironic when you look back on the message of Dead Poets Society.
Absolutely.
Carpe diem. I thought that there was just a kind of
eerie. I just got chills about that.
Yeah,
I did too. Just, I looked at it and I thought, hey, that's Robin Williams talking, not the character.
Definitely. It's just so sad. I mean, what a great talent. And and just I think makes us aware that we really have to watch out for the people around us to see. I mean, if they're struggling, I mean, could they really do something like that and watch over them?
And what could we do for them? If I'm working with another actor, I'm not a psychologist. If I see what I think is a troubled individual, I'm not going to get involved in this stuff. I got a scene to do.
I think that's a great question, though. What do we do? And what I would suggest is that we can't solve these problems by medication alone. That will not be the issue.
I was just going to say, a lot of people think that if you just take a pill or take something,
that can get worse.
But they're over-prescribing. I mean, that's a whole other story. We could probably dedicate an entire segment to that.
And you can't overcome it by laughter alone either, which is what I'm not a doctor, of course. I suggest that's what Robin was doing. He was overcoming his angst with humor, but it didn't really cure it.
That's a great point, because there's nothing like individual psychotherapy counseling where you're developing the strategies to cope. And he apparently never got into that effectively.
It's constant pressure. I mean, look, comedy is very, very, very hard. I mean, chatting here, hey, this is fun, this is great. Not that there's not a talent skill, but it's, look, I tell you what, I mean, I have so much, after I've kind of dabbled in it with comedians, it's difficult. I mean, it's really, and there's a lot of pressure.
They say being a comedian is one of the hardest things to do, to go up there and present yourself,
Put yourself
and hope
out
for
there.
that, hope for that laugh. And
Yeah,
that's one of
because
the
you might
hardest
not get
things.
it. You might get booed. You might get, and Robin Williams put himself out there, as you said, all the time. So maybe it just sort of, the pressure just got to him.
I have a very difficult question for you, Dr. Bart, and one of the things that you do hear sometimes when somebody takes their own life, a lot of people will use the word selfish, and you don't, I've obviously done a lot of reading on this, and we've talked before, but how can you explain to people that this is not a selfish act?
No, it's not a selfish act, because what's happened is you're overwrought with certain emotions and feelings, and as psychologists use the word conflict. You have some internal conflicts that are just raging. We may not see it, but it's there. And it's not selfish, it's just the result of people having despair and not being able to cope with the reality of what's going on.
Because it's something that I cannot grasp personally, and so, but quite a few people, and I said, no, it's not, but I heard quite a few people
Well,
saying
you
that.
leave 6 children behind, or people are good. Some people automatically think that, and they're not psychologists, so think, how could they do that and leave behind all these people who needed them? And so, I mean, I don't think it's out of bounds to at least think there's a possibility of that.
I think Robin Williams had a lot of his emotional investment invested in being a successful performer. His TV series tanked,
Yes,
and made a lot of money out of it. But I would strongly suspect he was feeling like a failure. And he's 62, and he had early Parkinson's.
Yeah,
all
I
of
agree.
which would make you think,
He also had
if
some
I don't have my
financial
humor,
problems.
what have I got?
Right, he's also had some financial problems, but he did leave 4 movies. I'm sure that you're aware of that, James, how many, he was working with several different movies, and they're wondering how to end these movies now because he hadn't finished them. But
And they've done that many times whenever actors have died, and they figure out a creative way to finish the movie, like the guy who played the Joker in Batman, Heath Ledger.
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
I think all of these are factors, but I say that he's had a personality problem from early on, and many different aspects of this personality, these negative features, have developed since he was a kid, and that's what led to this suicide, including obviously the drugs, the alcohol, personal
Maybe the
issues.
people around
and
him, maybe
yeah.
there were problems with those relationships,
I'm
because I
sure.
think that can keep you going.
And I also want to mention, if we were talking about his debt, they always say that many suicides are attributed to people that are having tremendous financial problems.
Yeah, and that relates directly to feelings of inadequacy, especially
when you've been this high.
Yeah, as
and then you
James
go
said,
low.
you're in your 60s and you're at that level, as you say, as an actor, and then you have financial problems that makes you feel so uncomfortable. It just exacerbates the whole situation.
Well, we do want to end this on a positive note. So let's talk about how he will be remembered, how you as individuals will also remember him, and your favorite. Now, I know you said that you mentioned Good Morning Vietnam. Dee Dee, any other favorite roles, and how will you remember Robin Williams?
Well, Mark and Mindy was silly, but I cannot keep thinking about him as being Mark. And he started that, and it's just some crazy show, but everyone remembers it. If you say Mark and Mindy, and that show was a long time ago.
And Gary Marshall, they were talking about, I was reading something that he said that he, when he came into audition, he actually stood on his head trying to drink water, and like
What a
this
shock.
was so crazy and just so funny. James, how will you remember Robin Williams?
Mrs. Doubtfire.
Okay.
Set
that's a
himself
good
on
one.
fire.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
How will you remember him?
Well, I saw an interchange of him with Jonathan Winters. They were both quite similar. And of course, Jonathan Winters had his emotional problems too. But seeing the two of them together was like watching a couple of masters.
Yeah, I mean, and he was a master, I mean, for so many years, so many generations. That's the other thing. Dr. Bart?
Just if there was one word, I would say unique. He was a comic all by himself. He was a standalone guy. I don't think there was anybody quite like him. And also brilliant. I mean, he really projected a certain image and a certain comic way about himself that I think was so different and unusual, odd, and yet just likable.
And of course, we'll be remembering him for his laughter and the joy that he brought to millions of people here in the United States and around the world. Robin Williams will be buried this week in San Francisco. And keep it here to Fresh Outlook. As we all know, it has become an increasingly chaotic world in the past few months. We'll update you on the latest from an incredible panel of guests. We'll be right back.